This is a session called Lies, Damn Lies, and School Vouchers. So, positive. I'm Gary Gottlieb. I'm from the University of Northern Colorado, and I live in Long Beach, so it's a long story.
Everyone, I'm Chris Salvania. I'm at the University of Wisconsin.
And I mean, today we're going to talk about lies, damn lies, and school vouchers, starting with efficiency and moving into some more principled claims that vouchers make.
Yeah. So I'm just going to run through a few slides, and I hope it won't be. I hope it'll be exciting. I know PowerPoint presentations aren't always the thing that I dream about at night, but in thinking about this theme about vouchers and the lies that are told about vouchers, I came up with this presentation, and I have efficiency kind of in these scare quotes here because part of the argument that is fed to folks is that private schools, a market-oriented kind of system, results in efficiency. Right? If you make schools compete against one another, they're going to magically figure out this secret formula about how to educate kids in a way that is cheaper or in a way where it costs less. For anyone who's worked in a school or who's spent time leading a school or who spent time designing a program or making policy, folks know that it is expensive to educate kids. It takes people. You have to pay people a competitive wage. It takes a lot of people if the needs are greater for the students, right? So there isn't this magic formula where then you can somehow just figure out how to educate kids and educate them well for cents on the dollar, right? It just isn't a reality. But these notions of efficiency, these notions of competition continue to permeate through our discourse, both in public discourse, when people talk to their neighbors, they talk about government schools and how they're wasteful, inefficient, but also in policy, right, through the creation of voucher programs. One of the ways that these ideas become so prominent and continue to permeate is because there are report after report after report that are put out by think tanks or organizations, often within states, right? And they say the exact same thing. They say private schools are more efficient than public schools. They do a better job for their students. They have better outcomes, and they cost less. Right? This is one example of one of these reports. It was put out by School Choice Wisconsin. And when I was putting this presentation together, I thought, well, I need to just find a report that would be emblematic of this kind of process that happens where a think tank just puts together something that where they try to make claims that are completely unfounded. And I thought it would take me hours. It took me like 1 minute. It is the nature of our current political discourse, public discourse, research discourse, that think tanks put these things out like they're nothing. They put them out, 10 reports per day, 100 reports per month, and then because of funding from organizations like the Heritage Foundation or others, they're well funded. So it looks like there's broad consensus. There's hundreds and hundreds of think tanks that are all reaching the same conclusions. But then if you follow the money, it's all the same thing, and they're all using the same, for lack of a good way of saying it, crappy methods, right? So what I'm going to try to do is just walk you through some of the claims that this report makes, the method that it uses, and then just to give you some, to kind of poke some holes in it, and to give you some language when someone comes to you and says, well, I saw this report by Wisconsin School Choice that says that actually private schools are more efficient than public schools. And you can say, well, actually, here's why this might not be true. So I just want to walk you through this report. The claim is that the 3 parental choice programs in Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, the Racine Parental Choice Program, and the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program are more efficient than the local school districts that also are within those communities. So the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, the report claims, is 89% more productive, another way of saying that more efficient, than the Milwaukee Public Schools. And I'll define what how the report talks about these things, right? But that is an astounding number, 89% more productive. The Racine Parental Choice Program is 92% more productive than the Racine Unified School District. And the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program is 42% more productive than the public schools outside of Milwaukee and Racine. So here's the formula that they use. Their cost-effective index is DPI's report card score for the school and the amount of per pupil revenue per student spent, right? So it looks something like this. The school could have a report card score of 65, and then they have a per pupil revenue calculation. So the school would spend $12,000 per kid for every $1,000, so it's about $12 for every $1 spent, and you get a score of 5.4. So they just come up with these numbers of report cards divided by the amount of money that the school gets, right? And then what they do is that they will take one school's calculated cost effectiveness index and divide it by a comparison school, and then subtract that by 1, and come up with these percent productivity numbers. So this is what it looks like in practice.
You actually found that formula.
Yeah, this is in the report. So this is in the report. This is in the report. And this is the stuff that gets used to promote or argue in favor, justify more funding for voucher programs. Right? And again, I don't think to anyone in this room this is surprising, that this is the kind of stuff that gets put out and used to justify voucher programs. But this is just another example, and I'm happy to share these slides to anyone who wants them. I can send them to WPE and they can send them out. But this is just another way of thinking about what the report card scores are, what the per pupil revenues are for those schools, for the programs, and then what the cost effectiveness, the calculated cost effectiveness ratios are. Right, so this is how we get to the 89%, the 92%, the 42%. The MPS, the MPCP is the Milwaukee program, the Parental Choice Program, the RPC is Racine, and you can see that they're just dividing. So they're just coming up with these 89%, 92%. Here's another way of looking at it, because they love visuals, and when bars are higher than others, it looks like they are doing a much better job. The other thing that school choice advocates, think tanks will often do is say not only are we more productive, we're more diverse. We serve students, because often the argument that you'll see made is, well, private schools, private voucher schools don't serve the same students, right? These are different schools. And so one of the claims that a different report made that was also put out by Wisconsin School Choice is that the private schools in Wisconsin are also more diverse. And they use two indicators. One is the percentage of students who are English language learners. They compare private schools to public schools. And the other is students who are economically disadvantaged. And in both of those, with both of those groups, they argue that private schools have a higher percentage of those students in their schools. They have more economically disadvantaged students, and they have more English language learners. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take these claims apart a little bit. The first part, I just want to show you this comparison that they're making within this report. So this is data that I pulled from DPI, and you could see here the green bar here, because we love bar charts too, is the percentage of students in schools in Wisconsin that are English language learners. So these are public schools in Wisconsin. About 5% of students across all Wisconsin schools are English language learners. In private schools, it's about 10%. So at a statewide level, this is important, the level that we're looking at, that seems to check out, right? Public schools, the red bar is economically disadvantaged students. On average, about 44% of students within schools in Wisconsin are economically disadvantaged. In private schools, it's about 55%. So both of those bars seem to check out at a statewide level, if you make a comparison between private schools and public schools. Now look at this bar. where public schools dominate private schools in terms of the share of their students represented as a total of the school composition. This is students with disabilities. So in public schools, about 16% of the students in those schools are students who have been identified with a disability. In private schools, it's about 3%. So already you could see that if you're making claims about diversity and you serving more diverse student populations, and you are omitting students with disabilities, and then trying to make these comparisons between costs and outcomes, that's a problem, right? If you are serving students with disabilities, it costs you more to support those students, and your outcomes are going to be different, right? But now I want to dig into these two bars here, where it seems like the claims check out, but in reality, if we break it out by region, all of a sudden, those differences tend to disappear in most areas of Wisconsin, right? So if we go back here, it looks like there's more economically disadvantaged students in private schools. It looks like there's more English language learners. But if we break it out by region, actually those differences kind of disappear, right? Public schools and private schools in schools that are in areas designated as cities, they tend to serve the same amount of students who are economically disadvantaged and students who are English language learners, right? The same is true for rural settings. The same is true for schools designated as being in towns, except these private schools do tend to serve a few more students who are English language learners. And in suburbs, private schools do tend to serve students at a higher rate who are economically disadvantaged. But it's not true for cities and for rural areas, right? So that claim we can already see starts to fall apart a little bit. The thing the pattern that still holds though is that the public schools in every part of the state continue at a high rate to serve more students with disabilities, right? So that's an important distinction that we have to keep in mind whenever you're reading any sort of report that tries to make comparisons between efficiency or productivity between what private schools and public schools are doing and what their outcomes are. The other thing that we need to care about is who is taking tests and who is opting out, especially when you are making comparisons about outcomes, right? So in public schools, the test participation rate, this is for English language arts, this red bar is for math. In public schools, it tends to be about 96% of all students in those schools take state mandated tests. In private schools, it tends to be closer to 77%, right? So it's a much different population of students that are taking the test. So all of these things will influence not only your costs if you're serving more students with disabilities, but also your outcome if you're excluding students or letting students opt out taking tests, right? And we see these patterns hold across all regions of Wisconsin as well. One of the other lies that you will often see in vouchers and claims about efficiency is that voucher programs will save states money, right? And this is the next line in these arguments is one, we show private school, I'm talking about the think tanks here, not me, but one of the things that is, the first part of the argument is private schools are more efficient, they have better outcomes, they're cheaper. The second argument that's become more prominent now among these think tanks and in these reports is that voucher programs will save you money because you're already giving less money, you don't have to pay, you don't have to cover different building costs, things like that, right? So these reports have come out. The problem is there's this issue here of switchers. A switcher in the reports is, it's supposed to capture the students who would have gone to a public school but ended up going to a private school. And often these reports say, well, we don't actually know what the real switcher rate is. We don't know how many students would have planned to go to a public school that are now switching to a private school. But what they're saying is it's actually probably very high, right? So most of the students who are going to private schools or who will take advantage of voucher programs would have gone to a public school. In reality, what we know now from years and years of data is that the students who are using voucher programs would have never gone to a public school in the first place, right? So the switcher rate that they're using is probably closer to zero than it is to 100% of those students being students who would have gone to public school, but now because they had some choice, or they had some sort of access to a market, that would have chosen not to go to their public school. We're subsidizing students who would have already gone to private school anyways.
Question, what is NEPC?
Oh, yeah. So these reports are put out by these are think tank reviews, right? So I mentioned that think tanks and other organizations like Wisconsin School Choice are putting out reports like Waterfalls. 10 come out a month that make all these claims, and it looks like, wow, there's some great consensus in the research. NEPC is the National Education Policy Center, and they have a series of reports that they put out that critique the think tank reports. And so this is the think tank review part of NEPC, the National Education Policy Center. Thank you very much. Yes, so these are good things to look at. Yeah, these are great resources for those of you who are interested in critiquing these reports and want some arguments. These are great responses. And so this was an article. There actually hasn't been a study in Wisconsin to think about or to look at the fiscal impact of vouchers and this concept of